Fascism is capitalism in decay. You may have heard that quote already, but what does it mean? And who said it? That seems like an easy question because the entire internet seems to be sure that it was the Russian revolutionary Vladimir Ilyich Lenin who said that, but it's not quite true. I spent more time than I should have trying to find a source on this, but there doesn't seem to be one. From this I conclude that it wasn't Lenin who said it, but someone evidently did, so we'll go with it. I guess our first lesson today is don't claim Lenin said this. Now that that's out of the way, let's look at what it's supposed to mean. For this we break it up into its components and talk about those for a bit. You should already be familiar with the words is and in if you watch English videos, so I'll ignore those. The word decay means to gradually become worse, at least in this context. I explain this because a lot of my viewers are from non-English speaking countries and it's not exactly the most common word, is it? The words fascism and capitalism are the interesting ones in this context. Capitalism can broadly be described as an economic system built on the grounds of the free market and private ownership over things like land and industry. We know it, we live in it, nothing much new, let's move on. Fascism is a political system in which the state has ultimate powers over everything, and civil liberties are kept at a minimum or don't exist at all. Historic examples include Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and Italy under Mussolini, who incidentally invented fascism, or fascismo as it's called in Italian. It's derived from the Latin word fascis, which refers to a bundle of sticks. The story goes, a single stick breaks easily, but the bundle of sticks is unbreakable, which shows us the first key feature of fascism: unity and lack of individuality. Fascists unify under the banner of their group, usually a race of people, against all others. They claim to be the strongest people of them all and explain away any evidence to the contrary with some great conspiracy. They're naturally quite xenophobic, and some of the worst things humanity is capable of happened under fascist regimes. Fascist economies are usually oriented in a pseudo-capitalist way. The rich business owners become friends with the party leadership and get many great government contracts. The state prosecutes anyone who threatens the profit of the industrialists. That includes unions, socialists, and foreign competition. Fascism isn't really capitalist, but it keeps the main features like private property and wage labor. The free market exists in some fascist societies and not in others. But how are those two things, fascism and capitalism, connected? To understand this, we have to look at the history of capitalism like a Marxist. You could say that we're gonna do a Marxist analysis of the history of capitalism. In Marxism, history and societies are understood by the systems of production they use. There are many different ways you can organize production, believe it or not. For example, there was feudalism, in which people were born into their social role and all the land belonged to the nobility while being worked by the peasants. This system started, it lived, and then it ended. Then there was slavery and mercantilism, both of which started, lived, and ended. And then there came capitalism. It was introduced during the French Revolution, it lived through and caused the Industrial Revolution, and then it died. Well, almost. Of course, this sounds really weird to viewers from 2019, since we all know that capitalism didn't die at time of recording. But there was a time where it came a lot closer than most people think. Right after the First World War, the Great War, the war that had devastated empires and destroyed monarchies, the people were angry and the people wanted a new world. In Russia there was a revolution, and in Germany the socialists had overthrown the Kaiser. Hungary proclaimed itself a socialist republic, and all major nations had massive socialist demonstrations. In 1929 the Great Depression hit the world and the people became even more angry. They became tired of being hungry and cold while the heads of the monopolies were living in luxury. In the United States, the Communist Party was gaining votes at an unprecedented pace, while in Bavaria the radicals proclaimed the new socialist republic as well. At the time, it really seemed like the days of capitalism were numbered. But then Germany, instead of falling to a socialist revolution, as revolutionary Marxists had predicted, went down the route of fascism. The calls for a classless society were replaced with calls for a society made up purely of Aryans. The blame for the economic crisis moved from the financial sector, who caused it, to Jews. All capitalist problems were blamed on foreigners or minorities, and soon the fascist party had taken over. How did a nation that was mostly made up of workers go from demanding the end of the monarchy to appointing an all-powerful dictator as head of state again? There are many answers to this, and every historian will give you a different interpretation. This doesn't mean that only one is right. There are many factors and many explanations could be true at the same time. Knowing that, here goes the Marxist explanation of what happened. Right after the First World War, as I mentioned, capitalism seemed to be at its end, just like all of the economic systems that came before it. The revolutions in Russia, Hungary and Bavaria might have seemed like the beginning of a new and better age for the workers who stood to gain everything from this. But not everyone was set to win from the abolition of capitalism. Notably, landowners and industrialists, what Marxists would call the bourgeoisie, did not like the idea of collectivizing their land and giving up their wealth and privilege. Imagine you're a capitalist living in Germany who just saw the Russian Revolution that deposed all capitalists and took their stuff and gave it to the masses while severely punishing those capitalists who didn't want to comply. You probably wouldn't enjoy that idea. And now you see the German working class push for the exact same thing. You probably wouldn't want to sit around until there is a revolution, would you? And then the rich and powerful did what they always do and began to meddle in politics. They paid huge donations to fascist parties that, until then, had barely gotten any voters. With nearly infinite money and free media coverage, the message of the fascists spread quickly. They picked up many socialist talking points and manipulated them to suit themselves. Instead of admitting that the financial sector is structurally exploitative, they said that the fault lied with individual people. Jewish people, to be more exact. In Germany, they even called themselves National Socialists to try to get the vote of the huge amount of workers who supported socialism, all while putting labor rights activists and union leaders into concentration camps at the request of their rich friends. When we look at fascist governments, we usually only think of the leader, the head of government. But beneath every dictator, there must be someone who gives them their power. And in fascism, those people are the heads of monopolies. Volkswagen, IG Farben, Rheinmetall, Krupp, Herschel, Mann, Daimler-Benz, Mauser, the Ford Motor Company, and practically every business that has existed in Germany at the time. Those were Hitler's friends. In Germany, the inmates of concentration camps were forced to work as slaves for private military and construction companies. And do you know what the gas that was used in the mass killings was? Zyklon B. It's not a scientific name for the gas, it's a brand name. It was made by a private company with a government contract. In fascist states, the interests of the state and the interests of the capitalists are the same. While a neoliberal democracy at least tries to balance the needs of the people with the greed of the capitalists, a fascist regime does not even try that. The capitalists are given contracts for the businesses and slaves to work for them, or for free, provided by the dictator. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is the way fascism spread to the people. From what we've seen now, it only benefits rich people that fund the party. So why did so many ordinary people become Nazis as well? Because of the main tactic fascists use: propaganda. They take the anger and frustration of the working class and turn it around and use it against minorities. Instead of admitting that the First World War and the economic crisis happened because of the way capitalism works, they just blame it on foreigners. They divide the working class. Instead of allowing a Polish and a German worker to identify as a united and exploited working class, they're pitted against each other so they cannot unite. Instead, the German worker is supposed to cooperate with the German industrialists that exploit him. Fascists use the most primal us versus them instinct in people to fabricate a conflict built around race instead of one around class. Then they tell everyone that they can bring about change, that they will make their nation great again and that they will make their enemies suffer if only they get in power. This, combined with the infinite funding and free exposure I mentioned before, made sure that they quickly became part of the government. And as soon as they were in power, they told the workers to hold out for a little more and that they would have to continue to work 12 hours a day until the final victory was achieved. This is where we come to the last big feature of fascism: a disdain for socialism. Do you remember how I mentioned that the capitalists only began to fund the fascists because they were afraid of the socialist revolution in Russia? They still were, and they wanted to destroy it at any cost. All fascists hate workers' rights, and they always talked about destroying the Bolsheviks in Russia. The destruction of socialism is the highest goal of fascism. So we could feasibly say that fascism is a reaction of the rich against the threat of the poor. When the poor organize to bring about equality, the rich will turn to fascism, which means that when capitalism comes close to falling, fascism will arise. That means that fascism is what happens when capitalism decays. Fascism is capitalism in decay. In conclusion, when capitalism fails and the people notice it and try to begin to change to a new system, the rich and powerful become afraid that they may lose their privileges, and they do everything in their power to stop this change. They will fund ultra-nationalist parties that use lies, manipulation and fear-mongering to divide the workers again, to fabricate the conflict between races instead of one between classes. And then, once in power, they remove any idea of civil liberties to make sure that they can never be brought down again. At least not from an uprising from within.